Hello, everyone. Welcome to the latest 43 Alumni for Biden PAC webinar. I'm John Farner with part of the organizing committee. I'm here joined with Chris Purcell, Karen Kirksey, also with the organizing committee. Thanks again for joining us. We have a really exciting program tonight for you all. Before we get started, wanted to make sure that you knew we want this to be interactive as possible. So if you have a question for Bill, for Susie, or anybody else on the organizing committee, please type that into the Q&A section. We'll have a moderated Q&A time after Bill's comments. And so please feel free to ask anything you want. If something pops in your head, type it in. We'll get to it after all of the comments are through. We do have some announcements to make later on after Bill's comments. After the Q&A section, we have some announcements of what's going on next week on top of the Republican convention that are pretty exciting. So stay tuned for that. But without further ado, Chris, I'm going to throw it off to you.
Yeah, I just want to thank everybody for joining, and don't want to make it say anything long-winded, but just want to welcome one of my former bosses from the White House, and one of my favorite people, and she may only be about 5'1", maybe.
That's stretching
but,
it.
on a good day. But she is tough and smart and very thoughtful, and we love to hear her comments about this election because she's been in Republican politics for some time, and is really a great person to talk about what it means to have values and to live those values in the political sphere. So without further ado, Suzy DeFrancis.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks for inviting me to talk. And I'm so honored to be on the same. I can't wait to hear Bill Kristol, who I've admired for a long time, doing a great job at Bulwark and Lincoln Project, of course. But I kind of got involved when I heard about 43 alumni for Biden, because that seemed like a safe space, to use a woke term, to come out and express my disdain for Donald Trump without disavowing my party and the principles we'd worked with. And about a month ago, I think it was July 14th, I sat down to write this tweet, and I said, it's really hard to write this. I've been a lifelong Republican. I've worked at the RNC for Haley Barbour. I worked for 2 Republican presidents. But our country is in such deep trouble and lives are at stake, and it's time for a change. And so I'm joining 43 Biden to vote for Joe Biden. And I sent it out, and I thought, well, maybe a few of my friends would see it and comment. And then all of a sudden my phone started blowing up. I mean, it was like, what's the pinball machine? Bing, bing, bing. And I couldn't believe the reaction. And what I found out was there were a lot of Democrats welcoming us, of course, but also a lot of Republicans who were like-minded. They were wanting to, express, how dangerous they thought Trump was, but they just couldn't quite get to Biden. And so I think that over the time now for us, between now and the election, that's really where we could focus some of our time, is particularly because we served in the last Republican administration, how to get them more comfortable. And I kind of had 3 ways I think we can do that. I think we can remind Republicans of what principled Republican leadership is. How many of you have friends who are Republicans who say, well, I don't like Trump, but I like what he does? And so, and Trump will say, well, he's done more than any president in 3.5 years. But if you look back at the Bush administration and what we did, I mean, there's no comparison. I mean, there were tax cuts like Trump has done, and most Republicans do that. But there was there was a positive agenda. We had education reform, No Child Left Behind, a Medicare prescription drug benefit that was huge for seniors, HSAs. I mean, who knew that Republicans could do healthcare too? We proposed PEPFAR, the president's emergency plan for AIDS relief, with Dr. Fauci. We had a faith-based office, and we proposed immigration reform. Didn't make it all the way, but it was a serious attempt, more serious than what we've seen. And, by the way, President Bush also ran, the war on terror, 9/11. So I think that we don't have to settle for someone who really is not up to the standards of Republican presidents in the past. that's thing one. I think thing two is we have to reassure Republicans about Biden, and that's a little harder. And I think we have to start with the premise that we're not going to agree with everything he says. And like Kasich said the other night, you know what? We have our differences, but that's okay. This is America. I mean, one thing we know about Biden, just from people who know him and have worked across the aisle with him, like John McCain and even Lindsey Graham, that there's no finer person than Biden. I mean, he's going to be somebody who will at least listen to other ideas and work across the aisle. And I think the other thing we have to disabuse people of, and I hear this all the time, including in my family, he's going to be pulled to the left. He's going to be a socialist. Well, first of all, he was the most moderate, as you remember, one of the most moderate of the Democrats who ran in the primary, and good for the Democrats that they went with him. But I think given his long track record in public life, we would have known if he were a socialist by now. And certainly, I don't think that he's going to impose that on everyone. So I think what we can do is study his record, because I've heard, people on TV just not know it. And I think it's important for us to know he's not going to raise middle-class taxes, et cetera, et cetera. And the one thing I do know that he's going to do, which is really important, I think, to all of us, is that he's going to put science first. He's already said that Fauci is going to be have unfettered access to the Oval Office and is going to be out front. And I think that's really important with what we're facing. And the third final thing is, I think we need to get Republicans to affirmatively pull that lever for Biden. So that's probably the hardest, because we're asking Republicans to do something they've never done before, maybe, or may never do again. But the point is that we can't sit this election out. I know that's been made numerous times. We can't just write in somebody. I've done that. Felt kind of good. But I just feel that a vote for anyone but Biden is a vote for Trump. And we cannot afford that this year. So my bottom line is I've lived through, and I'm sure Bill has too, lots of Democrat presidents. We'll survive Joe Biden. We will not survive, and our party will not survive 4 more years of Donald Trump. So I'm going to do everything I can in the next, and I know you will too, to make sure that doesn't happen. So thanks, Chris and John.
Susie, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And I think you mentioned there's a lot of groups out there working on this. There's the 43 Alumni for Biden PAC. There's Lincoln Project. There's Republican Voters Against Trump. The last one is the one that Bill helped found as a founding director. So I'm going to have Karen go ahead and go and introduce Bill.
Thanks, John. So this evening's guest has such a long and impressive resume. I wasn't quite sure how far I should go back. He, without question, is one of the leading conservative voices in the movement. He served both in the Reagan administration and in the George H.W. Bush administration. And in the latter, he served as chief of staff to Vice President Quayle. He's an author, he's a columnist, he's a commentator. He served as the founder of the conservative news magazine, The Weekly Standard, a member of Defending Democracy Together and Republicans for the Rule of Law. He currently heads up Republican Voters Against Trump, which is where we're aligned. And so Bill, we're delighted to have you. Really can't wait to hear what you have to say about the situation and the current goings on. The floor is all yours.
Well, thanks. And maybe I'll be brief so we can have plenty of time for questions. And it's great to be with Susie and with all of you. And I admire what you're doing. I think we need to have a lot of different efforts here to persuade our fellow Republicans, some ex-Republicans, some independents who often vote Republican, that it is the right thing to do, honestly, to cross the aisle. And both, as we describe ourselves as Republican voters against Trump, we have some people who aren't going to be able to, they say, to vote for Biden, but they voted for Trump last time, and at least they're deserting him this time, so that's something. But the great majority of the people who've sent in videos to us, testimonials to us, and those are authentic, they're done by them on their cell phones, and there are, over 650 at this point. The great majority of them have made taken that last step that Susie mentioned and decided the right thing to do, the responsible thing to do. for the country is to vote for Joe Biden, with all the differences and all the hesitations and all the expectations that it's not going to be perfect from, or close to perfect even from our point of view. So it's great that you're doing what you're doing, and it's great that our friends at the Lincoln Project are doing their thing. I think there are plenty of different angles to pursue on this, different generations, different strategies. Lincoln Project does some terrific ads. We do these primarily, we do some ads too, but these videos that are, we've been able to get, we've got it started. Now it's really spontaneous, honestly, of people coming, sending in testimonials. What's so interesting about that, maybe I'll say a word about that, is just they're authentic. They're quite moving if you watch them. Go to RVAT.org, Republican Voters Against Trump.org, and you can just watch a bunch of them on YouTube. And they're old, they're young, they're from all parts of the country. They're veterans, they're evangelical Christians, they're upper middle class secular businessmen, they're retired people, young people, college students actually, who quite eloquently talk about how they don't want to be a left-wing progressive. They want to be for markets and for a strong American leadership in the world. They want to defend traditional values in some ways, many ways, but they do not want to be part of a Trumpy nativist authoritarian party. But to say they don't want a socialist party or a cancel culture party either. And they really feel a certain almost despair. But I think we have all done something useful in giving them a place to go for now. Obviously, this is this is a 2-3 month effort. We'll see, and hopefully it'll work out and Biden will become president. Then we can all get back together. We really need to, and think about the future. And is the future saving the Republican Party? Is the future independent efforts? How does one save the Republican Party? Those are all very interesting topics, and I imagine all of us will try to play some role in that, and many, many others as well. But for now, I do think it's really important to have Republican voices saying, no, this is not the Republican Party. It didn't have to end this way. It's not going to end this way. It's an unfortunate interruption. There were elements of the party, obviously, and maybe more than we expected, who were susceptible to these kinds of demagogic appeals, and that's unfortunate. But what has happened, and Trump kind of got lucky, frankly, and became the president. What is more disheartening is the accommodation of Trump, the degree of, among Republican elected officials, conservative elites, and the conservative and Republican voters, obviously, the degree of just not some enthusiasm, but an awful lot of acceptance and rationalization and enabling of Trump. And that I do think is a problem going forward. But this, again, another reason why it's so important to have people stepping up now from all generations and saying no. And even if it's not a majority of Republicans, it is a significant number. And if you look at the polls, it could be a decisive number, 5, 8, 10, 12% moving over, who originally had taken a gamble on Trump or had sat out 2016, thought maybe it wouldn't be that bad. They certainly couldn't vote for Hillary Clinton, a lot of them felt. But we have a lot of people in the videos who say, he's not a politician, he's a businessman. I thought, he'll get better. He'll be more responsible once he sees what the Oval Office is about. Even I, who was a very big critic of his in 2015, 2016, thought for a little bit during the transition that maybe he would rise to the occasion. Maybe even he would sort of see the solemnity and the magnitude of the task. I lost that hope pretty fast. Other people held on to it, honestly, a little longer. It's interesting when you see the RVAT videos, they left at different points. There were different issues that were breaking points for different people. One guy very eloquently, kind of foreign policy oriented person, said Helsinki, that was the moment when he believed Putin over our intelligence community. For others, it was his management of the coronavirus, pretty obvious one. I think his reaction to the killing of George Floyd and then the subsequent racial tensions and unrest was a snapping point for more people than I would have realized. And I think it actually puts the lie to the notion that lots of Republicans don't care about racial harmony and racial progress, and the number of people who really dislike his, not just dislike, but understand how dangerous his divisiveness and his demagoguery and his willingness to play on anxieties and bigotries, to be honest, how dangerous that is. I've been struck by that in some of the videos. And then there are others who just sort of said, look, I finally gave up on him. His character isn't appropriate for the presidency. And maybe I'll make this the final point. A lot of them, I think, also, while in the first 2 or 3 years I was involved in various efforts to try to check Trump, get Republicans on the Hill to do more to stand up to him, get Republicans to challenge him in the presidential primaries. None of that particularly worked out that well. But I think it was easy to sort of say, what's the point? He's president, unless he's going to literally be removed from office. Why should I risk my political career? Why should I risk my friendships? Why should I risk my lobbying business? Why should I risk my conservative credentials, endanger my magazine? There were a ton of reasons why people didn't step forward. There still are, unfortunately. But I think what a lot of people experienced was when we got into 2020, you really had to decide. And I always thought this might happen. And this is one of the few things I think I was right about. When it became a forward-looking decision, and Susie sort of hinted at this, as opposed to a retrospective decision, it was do you want 4 more years of this? Not, was it a mistake to have done this in 2016? What's done is done. Not, what should people have done in 2019 about, or 2018 about, or 19 about the Mueller report, or 2020 about Ukraine, or this or that. But are you comfortable, given his behavior, given the progress or regress of his behavior, given the removal of some of the constraints that kind of kept him in line the first year or two? Are you comfortable with 4 more years of him in the Oval Office, reelected, with all that that implies, with a party that's even more compliant, even more subject to him, even less willing to stand up? Because if you're a reelected president, you've got a lot of clout, obviously. And I do think a lot of people, some not insignificant number of people, focused on that and thought, yeah, that is too dangerous. It'd be one thing if he'd grown in office, but it's been the opposite of anything, really. He's worse, He's gotten away with so much that it's just empowered him to be more demagogic and more irresponsible, more reckless in his embrace of various forms of extremism and so forth. So I think and I think all of us as Republicans saying enough is enough, and saying to our fellow Republicans, including ones who did support Trump in 2016, look, you can come on over. We're not going to beat you over the head. You're welcome in the anti-Trump coalition. People make mistakes, but maybe, you don't even have to say it was a mistake. Just you did what you thought was the right thing at the time. God knows all of us have made mistakes in our lives and politics and everywhere else. But going forward, let's work together for the sake of the country. And I think that's been a good message. I think it's the right message, honestly, you want to make it easy for people to come on over. My colleague Sarah Longwell talks about creating a permission structure for people who they don't want to be lectured at. They don't want people laughing at them. How could you ever fall for this guy? How could you ever be who would be better? It wasn't crazy to think that he might be better. It wasn't crazy to think that people like Mattis and McGahn and Kelly and others would be there for 4 years, not just for 1 or 2 years, and that there would be constraints, and you would not like certain things about him, but he wouldn't really push the bounds of democratic norms and threaten the rule of law and so forth. But whatever you could have thought, it didn't work out that way. And so now we need to let people come on over and give them a permission structure to do so. And so that's been particularly a focus of our efforts, but I think yours as well. And I think the more all of us do, the more other people feel they can do. I give the Biden campaign, a fair amount of credit for being pretty careful to try to create also a situation where people don't feel they're being lectured at, and they're invited to come on board. And it's a big coalition, and obviously we're not going to be thrilled with all of it. And some parts of the coalition we're not so crazy about, but they had got out of their way. They didn't have to have those Republicans on the first 2 nights of the convention, especially the first night, and to feature them so much. And I think that's an authentic part of who Biden is. And I don't think sometimes we get attacked. Oh, you want a job in the Biden administration, which is really ludicrous. And you're going to be disappointed. And I don't want a job, and I expect to be disappointed. But I really do expect, and I'm confident really, that Joe Biden will be a better president in his first term for this country than Donald Trump would be in his second term. So I think we're doing the right thing, and I hope we're having some impact, honestly. And now we've got to just work hard for the next 2.5 months, and then we can rethink everything else and save the party. We've got a lot of other tasks, but for now we really do need to. Trump's second term really would be disastrous.
So, Bill, I want to just follow up real quick and continue this conversation a little bit, because in most of the questions we've gotten so far in our Q&A section and our chat, as well as questions that we get on a regular basis from the organizing committee, and both Susie and you touched upon this, but it's how do I convince my family and friends who have voted Republicans their whole lives, and they may be single issue voters, They may be voting on gun control. They may be voting on social programs. They may be voting on abortion. How do we change their minds given the fact they have voted Republican since the 50s and 60s through now, never voted for a Democrat, ever? Maybe they wrote somebody in 2016. What are some of the key things? We can talk about the future of the party, future of America in the abstract, but do you have any suggestions on what you've heard, given the conversations you've had and what you've heard from the people interacting with RVAT? And we'll start with you, and maybe Susie, you can chime in too, but we'll start with Bill first.
Okay, well, I'd like to hear Susie's views. Yeah, so I mean, just a lot of the videos explicitly address this. I mean, usually the videos begin the form, we kind of stumbled on this. It was the first couple people did it this way, and then everyone has started doing it this way. You know, hi, I'm Bill from Virginia, and I'm a lifelong Republican, or I've voted Republican in every presidential election since whatever year, you know. And so they then explain why they're changing. And I think it's one reason these videos are quite effective, actually. It puts them, the person watching, whom you described, is in the same shoes as the person they're watching. It's not, you know, someone else lecturing to them who thought the Republican Party was terrible 20 years ago. It's not, these are people who have been quite loyal Republicans, at least until 2016, and in some cases actually passed through 2016. So what they say, so I think one way to be effective with other people like that is to show them these videos and show them people like themselves. And as I say, there are veterans, and there are evangelical Christians, and there are business types, and there are retired people. And, you know, so there are varieties of people, maybe, you know, who would correspond with some of the people who are asking these questions or making that challenge. I do think you have to give people a kind of an easy path. They're not turning their back on something, you know, fundamental. It was whatever the merits again of what happened in 2015 and 16, we now face this choice, and are they comfortable with 4 more years of Trump? They can go vote Republican down ticket if they want. They can vote Republican in 2021. Here in Virginia, we have gubernatorial elections. They can vote Republican for the House and for the Senate. They can support their favorite Republican candidate or candidates in 2024 for the 2024 nomination. This isn't a kind of an exceptional situation. So now there are people out there, and it's perfectly legitimate, who want to make a much bigger claim. You know, this is the end of conservatism, and everyone needs to rethink everything, and you need to become a liberal. And fine, that's what people who write articles like that do for a living, and they're entitled to make that argument, and other people will argue back. But I don't think that's the pitch we're making. We're making a much more narrower pitch. And I do think Biden helps. And we intervened a little. We publicly asked independents and Republicans to vote for Biden in the states where they could participate in the Democratic primaries, like Virginia, which is an open registration state, because we thought it important to give Republicans a better choice than Trump and Sanders, let's say, which, remember, looked kind of possible in mid-February. So I do think, you know, Biden should make people a little more comfortable. The tone of the Biden campaign should make people a little more comfortable. But it really does come down to Trump. And people just need to really look in the mirror, and they can't buy they find they don't like the left, they don't like this, they don't like that. But they really need to think through look at his recklessness, look at what he's been doing the last few months, look at his mismanagement of COVID, and then just think 4 more years of this with fewer constraints and an emboldened and sort of more even headstrong Donald Trump. What does that look like? And I think that's, for me, I think the key argument to make to them.
Susie, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what Bill said. And I keep going back to the coronavirus right now, because it's so much a part of all of our lives. And people that I talk to, friends and stuff, they're struggling with the school issue. That's why I thought, you know, Mrs. Biden did such a really great job set up in a schoolroom. You know, how do we get our kids back to school? I think it's those, you know, just everyday issues that we need to go back to people on. I mean, I think character is important. But I think people have kind of formed their opinion of Trump on that. So, you know, maybe it's like, you know, and again, you don't want to push him way over, but maybe it's time for a change. You know, we've had, you know, this virus is coming back. It's time for a change. Let's try someone who can come in, who's ready from day one, very experienced, can build a team that hopefully would stay as a team. I mean, a lot of people who voted for him thought he was, you know, a businessman, and he was, but he couldn't keep a team. He couldn't build anything. And so I think it's things like that. And I do think that, maybe knowing a little more about his record, if we study up a little more on his record, we can answer some of the claims that you'll hear all the time that are kind of crazy.
I mean, I just make one additional point. I mean, it's a big country, and a lot of people have different priorities when they vote, as they should. They're veterans, but not just veterans, who care a huge amount about foreign policy and national security in the military. They're people who are strongly pro-life, and for them, that issue really is the number one issue. And look, some of those people, given where the Democratic Party is on some issues, I'd say the life issue is the most obvious. It's very hard for them to come to vote for a party that's now pretty much abandoned any restraints on the abortion right. And I could make an argument, and I have made this argument many times, that in the real world, it's not going to make that much difference. I mean, I think we've gradually been reducing the number of abortions, which is a good thing, mostly not through legal means particularly. And that's going to continue. And I don't think, on the other hand, 4 more years of Trump's going to make abortion illegal. It certainly isn't, in fact, because a lot of states will keep it legal, even if the court overrules Roe. So it's become more of almost a symbolic thing. But it's hard. There are people who have, as a matter of conscience, would feel that they couldn't vote for a Biden-Harris ticket. In that case, I think we just tell them, look, we're not going to tell you, to violate your conscience, but don't vote for Trump. Just at least don't give him that extra vote. And that at least is one vote removed, which is good. But I think apart from that issue, most of these issues are more matters of gradation. But I think we need to meet them where they are. You know what I mean? There's no one magic bullet. I very much agree that the coronavirus management has really been the spotlight on that his deficiencies aren't just, oh, he's vulgar, oh, he tweets a lot, oh, he's kind of not the greatest guy in the world, but I mean, hey, the economy's good, and I don't see any great disaster. Well, now we do see a great disaster. And so I think bringing that home, and the fact that it didn't have to be this way. I do these conversations online, which people can look at if they want. They're longer, with the academics usually, with Mark Lipsitch of the Harvard Public Health School. Very apolitical guy. I mean, he tries to keep politics out of his stuff. And I kind of pushed him a little. He's cautious. He's a professor of public health, and and he just finally said it didn't have to be this way. It's really a disgrace that we're in this position. We have the greatest biomedical infrastructure in the world, the physicians, the CDC, the pharmaceutical companies. And fine, we can mess things up, we always do, everyone does. And it was sort of understandable. I mean, he was ridiculous, Trump, in February and March, but still you can understand getting it wrong at the beginning. But now you look at Europe, and they're having a little resurgence, and they have 15 deaths in a country, and we have 1,400, I think it was, today. These are the countries that are our peers. If you just look at the charts, we look like Russia and Brazil and Mexico and Pakistan in our charts of not containing the deaths, not containing COVID, and unfortunately ready for probably even another little bit of an upsurge. And we don't look like, it's not only we don't look like Germany and Japan and South Korea and Australia, which have done a good job. We don't look like Spain or Italy, which really didn't do a good job at the very beginning and got clobbered, but are now that they did get it under control. And guess what? They're going back to school. They're going back to school with distancing and with masks, and it's not perfect, and the economies haven't fully recovered, but they've recovered a lot more than we have. So this is all unnecessary. The fact that we're really going to take a big hit in the economy, the school disaster, the universities, that is Trump. I mean, were there deficiencies in our federal government anyway? Sure, some agencies probably didn't work as well as they might have, though maybe Trump should have fixed that. But a huge amount of it is really personally could be laid at his bad, not just bad management, but reckless and irresponsible management. So I agree with Susie that when you get down to it, that is the example here in 2020, I think, of the price we're paying, unfortunately, for someone who's it's not that he's not the greatest manager in the world, or he doesn't have the longest attention span in the world. He's just positively reckless and irresponsible in dealing with this life and death issue.
Speaking of the party, there's a lot. Let me preface this with saying the goal for the 43 alumni for Biden is to get Joe Biden in office. That is our goal, plain and simple. We are asked a lot about the future of the Republican Party after Trumpism. Is Trumpism going to go away? Does it need to be a burn to the ground strategy and rebuild from there? I was wondering, Bill, given your thoughts either from RVAT's perspective or from Bill Kristol's perspective, on the future of the party, what needs to be done, and are there any viable leaders that haven't been, quote, tainted by Trumpism that can really take this party into the future?
So the short answer is I'm not sure, and I think no one is sure what the post-November 3rd future holds, assuming Trump loses. We really haven't had this experience before. We've had failed presidencies that didn't work well, Hoover or Carter or something, and we've had parties change after failed candidacies. When Goldwater and McGovern get clobbered, the party adjusts. We haven't had a presidency like this, I don't think, where the party has gone along with someone who's really done damage to the country. And so how much of a cleansing there has to be, how much of a repudiation of Trump, or can you just move on and sort of put it behind us? I mean, those are huge questions, and different people have different opinions. I mean, we actually debated a lot within our Defending Democracy Together circles, the Bulwark, which is the website which publishes stuff from all of our people, but then from a lot of other people as well, and people should send in contributions. I think we've had a lot of the debate there, and then with our friends who are elsewhere, David French and others at the Dispatch, and I think it's a healthy debate. People say, well, you guys all don't seem to quite agree entirely on, does it have to be bird to the ground? That's like an excessive metaphor, is maybe not the best, but does it really have to be? Do you have to have a fundamental break in repudiation? Is that possible or impossible? Can you just move on? What do we think of people who've kind of just kept their head down? Do we just need a whole new generation? As you say, how do you have to scrub out the taint, or can the taint just kind of gradually evaporate, over months and years? These are all legitimate questions that we don't all agree on, and don't all have we don't have much experience, I think, in knowing what the right answer is, and I think that'll be a vigorous debate after November 3rd. So yeah, I don't think there's any one answer. I'm probably a little more on the pessimistic side of I'm more worried that Trump and Trumpism has gone pretty deeply embedded, the habits of Trumpism, almost rhetorical, and the demagoguery, but maybe not. You get a big defeat and people wake up on November 4th. I don't think they wake up and it just all goes away. I don't quite buy that. There has to be some coming to grips with what happened, but that doesn't mean you have to have a purge. That doesn't mean that people have to go confess or spend months apologizing. They do need to set off in a different direction, I think. But as I say, if you look, we've been having this debate among ourselves, and actually one of the healthy things about the Never Trump movement, which has obviously been attacked a fair amount and caricatured some, is we don't all agree with each other. And you know what? It would be kind of crazy if we did. I mean, about all these issues. I think we all agree that we need to not re-elect Donald Trump. But why would we? I mean, it's a free country. We're all different backgrounds, slightly different perspectives of political philosophy, different generations. So we're going to have somewhat different perspectives on what the future might hold. I think we all want to work together and argue this out in a collegial way after November 3rd, but we're not all going to be supporting the same person probably in 2024. So, here are 5 of us on the screen, right? Why should we, right? One of us might prefer, I don't know, maybe whatever. So, Governor Hogan, and one of us might prefer Senator Rubio, and someone else might prefer someone we haven't even thought of yet, and so forth, Nikki Haley and so forth. So I think that's a healthy thing, actually. We have not enforced an orthodoxy. I mean, we don't enforce anything because we have no power, but I mean, the only point is what you said. Well, I think that we agree that we can't afford a second term of Donald Trump. We agree that we need to have, I think, a serious and healthy debate about the future of the party and future of conservatism. We can't just be complacent and say, well, this was a weird thing. It came out of nowhere and now he's gone, so we don't have to worry about anything. That would be a little silly, I think. On the other hand, the kind of just, we repudiated it all, we're walking away. What does that mean? I mean, half the country the Republican Party is one of the 2 major parties in this country. It's important to the future of this country that we have a responsible center-right party, as it's important that we have a responsible center-left party, where as responsible as possible. So maybe it won't happen. Maybe you can't make it happen. Maybe after 3 years, someone like me decides, I just can't do it. So we have to think of some third way or something like that. But I think if you think of the 2 constraints for me are, we can't pretend this didn't happen, but we can't just say, fine, if you Trumpists want the Republican Party, you can have it. That's not a responsible thing to say. That's not good for the future of the country. So in between the tactics of how you kind of come back with a responsible party, that's something really that's going to be a very interesting actual debate to participate in after November 3rd.
And I have one more question for both Bill and for Susie. The majority of folks on this webinar are former public servants. So one of the things that was very important to me in serving President Bush, and I'm sure others as part of the organizing committee and part of our efforts, was the character we brought to our work every day. And character matters, character counts. I mentioned before we got on the webinar that we have a panel that's going live on the 26th as part of the Convention on Founding Principles of former alumni of the George W. Bush administration. But in your words, what does that mean? So when we go out there and say, we worked for President Bush and we're supporting Joe Biden, how important is that to define character as part of that discussion?
Susie, what do you think?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we all feel it was an honor to work for President Bush. Because of the way that he conducted himself in the office, the dignity he brought to it. I know, having worked in the communications side of it, that anything that went to the president had to be factually checked. It had to be accurate. There was an emphasis on doing those kinds of things. And then there were the grace notes that he showed. I mean, I think I'll always remember him saying, that the hardest job in America is a single mom, or the soft bigotry of low expectations when it came to education reform, or things like that showed that character, that compassion. And I think too, he of course he made mistakes, and everybody does, but he always upheld the office. We could be proud of the Oval Office and the people that occupied it. And that's what's really, and now with Trump, his lack of character is really costing us. It's, costing us lives. It's costing a lot of things that are really dangerous. So I think it's very important for us to look for those qualities in a president. And I do think that Joe Biden, like I said, he has the experience. I think he also has the compassion gene, which Trump seems to be lacking. And certainly he's a man of character, and his life story, everything tells you that. I loved the line last night by Joe Biden that after Bo died, he got up, 4 days later, put on his suit and ties, straightened up his shoulders and went out there. I mean, that's the kind of person we need in the White House. And I think Bush was like that and demonstrated it in the wake of 9/11 and in many other ways. And I think Biden is too.
Susie, to your point, one of the other things that Trump doesn't do is just take responsibility for anything, which is so troubling for a lot of people. People are dying, and he says it is what it is. I mean, it's flippant comments. It's a disregard for human life. And that, I think that's one of the things that trouble a lot of people.
I've grappled with this because from the very beginning, I just couldn't believe he was behaving the way he was behaving. Remember the day after his inauguration, Trump went to the TV agency, to the CIA, and stood in that hall. And before the names of the stars, not the names because they're secret, many of them, but the stars of the representing the fallen CIA officers over the years, and just gave this idiotic speech, part politics, part about his inaugural crowd and so forth. He remembered to read a few sentences about the tribute to the officers, but not much, And I thought, God, it's so degrading. And then watching it over and over and over, of course, by him, but also, frankly, lots of people who he brought in with him, who didn't, let's say, have the highest ethical standards. When I think of what Susie went through this too, the kind of carefulness of not even getting close to various lines in terms of self-dealing. And when I was Quayle's chief of staff, and when I was youngish, I had no money. I'd been a professor, assistant professor, and then come to Washington with a couple of kids. I literally probably had $20,000 in some money market funds or something like that. But I think maybe I had them in stocks for some crazy reason. I don't know why. Someone had told me this was a good stock or something. But I remember putting them in money market funds so no one could think I was influencing. I was so ridiculous, the amount of money that would have been. And I wasn't really in a position as Vice President Quayle's chief of staff to be making the market move. But I just thought, you can't. And I think that was not quite legally required. A lot of things are legally required, disclosures and stuff. But I just remember we all did that kind of thing. We just thought there were, of course, unfortunately, a few exceptions, but that was very much the tone of both Bush White Houses and the Reagan administration as well. And again, they're not perfect. If men were angels, we wouldn't need to have government and so forth. But that was the expectation. And to say that the expectation is the opposite almost in the Trump administration isn't much of an exaggeration. But I found it hard to bring that home to people, I've got to say. I'd be on TV. It's funny, when I was on with Brian Williams, who, is about my age, I think, and was around for the Reagan and Bush years, Bush 1 years, George H.W. Bush years. We would sort of say that you just couldn't do this in the old days, the kind of, denigrating people as president, the lack of any dignity in the office, the use of the White House for political purposes, the most crass partisan purposes. And would sort of reminisce for our 4 or 5 minutes on our TV segment, and would I remember afterwards telling him, it's kind of, I don't know if people really, maybe they just think that's kind of old fashioned and it's the way it was and can't come back. And maybe you need, and there was a lot of this, one forgets this a year or two ago, Bill, you're just like that. You guys were losers. That was, you were too nice. You got to be tough like Trump, you got to really take it to the left, own the libs and all. I think that looks a little stupid now, honestly, and I don't hear that quite as much because it's like, well, that was great. You own the libs and 170,000 people were dead and we have a recession and we're not respected. We can't get the UN to support our Iran policy, and I was in favor of a tougher Iran policy because you've so alienated our allies and so forth. So it's hard to bring home to people that the dignity, the character, the respect for norms and institutions matters, but it does ultimately in a constitutional democracy. And maybe that's one of the lessons we've learned. I think some of the Democrats actually have learned that a little bit. They were getting a little bit like, we're progressives, we're beyond all this nonsense about separation of powers, and we don't have to be stuffy about these things. And I think there's a little more appreciation on their part that, it's good to have certain rules and limits that are well established, and where you don't just think, hey, we can throw them out the window. I remember when I was in the White House, Marlon Fitzwater was George H.W. Bush's press secretary. He had been actually a career civil servant and then gone to work for Vice President Bush. I may have this slightly wrong, but I think this is right. He would not say the word Democrat or Republican from the White House podium, and he wouldn't attack another party or even a member of another party. I mean, he'd criticize, he'd say, we believe this legislation is better than Senator Mitchell's, and we hope Senator Mitchell will rethink and come around to, supporting our legislation, or, we think we do need to go to war in the Gulf against Saddam Hussein and at the end of 1990, and we hope, but it was like that. He really thought, he's the White House press secretary, there's an RNC press secretary, there'll be a campaign press secretary, they can attack the Democratic Party. You should not do that, he thought. He was speaking for the president of the United States. He's speaking to foreign leaders occasionally. He's speaking to the American people. I mean, that's so far. There was a gradual sliding away from that, frankly, over the last 25, 30 years, probably. But I mean, Trump has just accelerated the slide down, and it's bad. It's bad for the country. It really is, the way autocratic regimes behave, attacking your domestic political rivals as if they're enemies of the people and of the state. But anyway, it's a hard thing to bring home to people, I've found, the damage that does, but maybe people see it a little more now.
So I have one more question, and I know that we're coming up on the end here, but it would be remiss if I didn't bring up the comments today from the White House podium talking about possibly not accepting the election results and how dangerous that is to democracy. And you mentioned, Bill, Republican presidents not talking Republican or Democrat and directing their staff not to bring up political parties within the halls of the White House, let alone challenging our democratic process from the podium. This goes to turning out the vote in a major way. And I know there's a lot of talk with the post office now on how to vote. What are your thoughts, or what is RVAT doing, and where we could possibly help out with that kind of messaging on either vote early, support the post office, or really drive that vote? So there's no question at all. The swing states all go to Biden. There's just no question that Biden showed in a landslide. How do we get to that point in our messaging and our actions?
Yeah, well, that would be a better outcome, partly for this reason. I was part of these groups that have been written up a little bit now. They were private and confidential at first. Most of the law professors, people who've served in government, Defense Department, a lot of different places, actually, a lot of Bush 43 veterans, and then a lot of Clinton and Obama veterans, not military veterans, but veterans of the administration, where we did these scenarios, these kind of game playing of what would happen if it were a close election. And I played actually Trump in 2 of these simulations. And it is scary, again, if you just decide you're going to ignore the norms, if you decide I'm going to say things that aren't true, And if you have enough political cronies in key positions that they too may say things that aren't true, if the director of national intelligence is willing to say, we've discovered Chinese involvement in the Biden campaign on October 20th, and I can't find any data, it's confidential, but it's very worrisome. Are we confident that, I don't think rank and file CIA people would get involved in that kind of thing. Are we confident that the people he's now got in, I think we'd be confident that maybe the first tier of people, Jim Mattis and all, wouldn't tolerate that. I'm less confident, unfortunately, that current people wouldn't tolerate. So the kinds of games he can play way beyond dirty tricks in terms of using the powers of the federal government to say nothing of his routine demagoguery and so forth, to distort the election as it goes forward over the next 2 months, and then obviously to challenge the results, perhaps, to cause violence and mayhem and confusion, to pressure Republican governors to not accept results. It's all very worrisome. Short term, people need to vote, and they really should. It differs a lot state to state, so it's hard to give one set of guidance. But if they're going to vote by mail, which is totally safe, they should do so. They should do so early to make sure the ballot actually gets in. If they can drop it off, maybe they should do that rather than put it in the mail. But it's gotten pretty easy in most of the states to get the application for the absentee ballot. A lot of states have expanded the in-person voting and made it much easier earlier, which is a good thing, because it means you won't be in a huge crowd, presumably on election day, and you can vote 2 Saturdays before at your community center. That's how we do it in Virginia, at least. And it's not terribly odorous. It's not odorous at all, and it's usually not that crowded, so you can kind of go in an appropriate way in the age of COVID. But people do need to plan to vote in a way that you didn't have to in the old days, I think, and really make sure they can vote. It's important not get distracted by all this nonsense. In the short term, I also think we're going to work on this in the next few days, actually. Congress needs to get money to the Postal Service and prevent the Postmaster General from doing things that, even if he personally, it's conceivable, didn't think it was messing with the election, it was just private sector efficiencies. It's a heck of a time to introduce them now, right? 2 months before the election. Let's just do an experiment and get rid of a lot of, processing, because ultimately it's going to be better when we get the new ones. But fine, let's do that next year, So, and in fact, what's really happening in the real world is people aren't getting their medications and their checks and so forth. So it's actually doing real damage. I think the Congress may force, that to be fixed, but that's a short-term legislative fight as well. So, yeah, I do think we need, and I think people just need to be aware, and this is again where they can tell their families and stuff. You just can't believe what you see on social media. There's a lot of Russian disinformation. Unfortunately, you just can't believe the president. You can't believe a lot of people at some news channels and some news outlets. And so you may think that, oh my God, did you hear this scandal somewhere? And it could be totally fake, right? Look at the Ukraine. I come back to Ukraine. You got impeached for that. It was sort of forgotten about it. What was the point of that? The point of that was to invent fake evidence that would discredit Joe Biden, whom he correctly saw, I think, as the biggest challenge to him. Do we think he's given up on that? What stopped Ukraine? What stopped Ukraine? It's a tribute to American government, really. It was a lot of career civil servants, but also some political appointees, including John Bolton, someone from the Reagan and Bush administrations. It was controversial and had kind of hard-nosed views and so forth, but he wouldn't go along with some of this. If Fiona Hill wouldn't go along and Alexander Vindman wouldn't go along, and they stopped him from doing what he wanted to do in Ukraine. All those people are gone. And the people who've replaced them are not, I think, unfortunately, quite as strong and quite as independent. And that worries me a lot, that, we don't have some of those barriers that were in place until pretty recently. But again, the things he's done that have sort of degraded the treatment of Lieutenant Colonel Vindman, both as he was testifying, which he was required to do before Congress, and testified truthfully, no one challenged a word he said. And then the removing him from the National Security Council as a kind of punishment, and the trashing of him on Twitter and by the president. It's really almost, I find it sort of unbelievable that more people aren't more upset about that. Susie and I are upset, and you all are upset, I think. And maybe that's because we've been in government. We have some sense of the price you pay when you lose all these boundaries of kind of, you should do your job and do the right thing, and it all becomes just, I want to do whatever the guy at the top wants me to do. But it's that's upsetting. But in any case, I think short term we need to focus on helping people vote as much as safely as possible.
Before I announce our final thing, Bill, thanks a lot. Susie, thank you so much. Karen and Chris, as always, it's always a pleasure talking to you guys. I talk to you way too much, I feel like, but thanks a lot. So next week, I don't think, Bill, you even know this, we have the fortunate opportunity to have Governor John Kasich join us for a webinar.
Oh,
So he'll be here on Wednesday evening at 6 in the East. So registration for that will open up tomorrow. Again, free of charge. All of our supporters for 43 for Biden PAC can sign on, and he's fresh off of Democratic convention, right in the middle of the Republican convention, of some good thoughts on his experience in working with the Democratic Party and joining the Joe Biden campaign, as well as some reactions to the Republican convention as well. So with that said, Bill, Susie, Karen, Chris, thanks a lot. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, John.
Thank
Thanks.
you. Good luck.
Yeah.
All right, we'll stay in touch.
Thanks.
Bye.